Welcome to American National Government. In this course, you will discuss the purpose, structure, and evolution of United States government.
I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government Instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from American Government, Roots and Reform, American Government by Lenz and Holman, and our course-assigned OpenStax American Government textbook. This lecture focuses on parties as ballot infrastructure. The core question is this: what do political parties really do when ballots, donor lists, voter files, and turnout operations become the infrastructure that decides who can compete at all? The core competency is to describe the purpose, function, and limitations of political parties in our electoral system. What do political parties really do when ballots, donor lists, voter files, and turnout operations become the infrastructure that decides who can compete at all? The fight moves through ballot access, filing deadlines, voter files, donor networks, nomination rules, and turnout systems that determine who can compete. American voters like to imagine themselves choosing freely from the full range of public possibility. The ballot usually tells a harder truth. Most voters encounter politics through two major party labels: a limited set of nominees and a campaign structure built long before the individual voter enters the booth. Political parties are not mentioned as governing branches in the Constitution, yet they sit at the entrance to nearly every major office. They recruit candidates, run primaries, write platforms, raise money, distribute voter data, train volunteers, negotiate ballot access, coordinate messages, and organize Congress after Election Day. They function as the organizational roadbed under modern elections. The civic problem is that parties solve a real problem by creating another one. A mass democracy without parties would drown in names, issues, factions, personalities, interest groups, donors, local demands, and policy claims. Parties simplify that chaos. They tell voters which candidates belong to which coalition. They make campaigns legible. They give office holders teammates. They help Congress organize committees, leadership, and agendas. Parties convert political noise into usable choices. That usefulness comes with cost. Once two parties dominate ballot access and voter habit, they become gatekeepers. They decide who receives institutional backing, which issues get coalition space, which voters receive attention, and which candidates become viable before most citizens notice the race. Third parties can run, but single-member districts and first-past-the-post elections punish them. A voter may hold views that do not fit either coalition, yet the system pressures that voter to choose the less distant option. The party system operates as infrastructure of faction. Madison warned that factions would pursue partial interests against the public good. He hoped an extended republic would make majority faction harder to organize. The American party system did something more complicated. It organized faction into durable competition. It put faction on a schedule, gave it labels, and tied it to ballots. The founders did not design the Constitution around modern political parties. Many feared parties as signs of corruption, foreign influence, or factional decay, yet the system almost immediately generated parties because constitutional machinery created incentives for coordination. Elections required candidate support. Congress required voting blocks. Presidents needed allies. Newspapers took sides. Treasury policy, foreign affairs, regional interest, banking, debt, slavery, tariffs, and expansion all produced organized conflict. That early suspicion carries force because it reveals the contradiction at the heart of party politics. Americans distrust parties while depending on them. They condemn party loyalty as tribal behavior, then rely on party labels to understand hundreds of candidates they cannot personally investigate. They complain that parties divide the nation, then punish politicians who refuse to take sides clearly enough. Parties survive because mass politics needs organization. Electoral rules gave the two-party system special strength. Single-member districts usually elect one winner from one geographic constituency. First-past-the-post rules award victory to the candidate with the most votes, even without majority support in some contests. That combination discourages small parties because voters fear wasting votes on candidates who cannot win. Donors, activists, and media then concentrate attention on the two major vehicles capable of victory. Ballot access rules add more friction through signature requirements, filing deadlines, party recognition rules, and state-by-state election administration. The result is not pure voter preference. It is voter preference filtered through institutional design. The alternative would be a multi-party system with proportional representation, coalition governments, and more formal representation for smaller ideological groups. That model can give voters more precise choices. It can also produce fragile governing coalitions, bargaining after elections, and parties with narrow appeals holding leverage beyond their vote share. The American system takes a different bargain. It forces many conflicts into two large tents before the general election, then asks voters to choose between broad coalitions rather than many precise factions. Party nominations make this bargain visible. A primary election identifies which version of a party reaches the general election. Primary electorates often differ from the full public. Party activists pay closer attention. Donors and interest groups invest early. Candidates craft messages for nomination before pivoting toward the wider electorate. The party's gatekeeping role, therefore, starts before the general election and continues through endorsements, data access, staffing networks, and fundraising channels. Third parties expose the limits of the system. They rarely win national office, but they can move issues into public debate, pressure major parties, and signal dissatisfaction that the major coalitions cannot fully absorb. Their weakness does not prove they are irrelevant. It proves the electoral structure makes issue influence easier than office holding. The early republic exposed the party problem almost immediately. George Washington warned in the farewell address against the baneful effects of party spirit, but the machinery of the Constitution already rewarded organized alliances. Alexander Hamilton's Treasury Program, Assumption Plan, National Bank, and close commercial ties to Britain pushed one coalition together, while Thomas Jefferson and James Madison built another around agrarian suspicion of concentrated finance and sympathy for France. Congressional caucuses, partisan newspapers, and state legislative networks turned those alignments into operating organizations by the 1790s. State election law and ballot practice then made party coordination durable. Legislatures controlled voter qualifications, district lines, and election timing. In the early 19th century, many states still used legislative caucuses, elite conventions, or informal local bargains to choose nominees. By the Jacksonian era, broader white male suffrage and mass turnout created pressure for stronger nominating machinery, which helped generate the national convention system in the 1830s. Later reforms replaced smoke-filled rooms with direct primaries in many states, but that change did not remove party control. It shifted the gatekeeping point from convention floor managers to primary law design, petition rules, filing fees, and turnout capacity. Modern two-party durability also rests on electoral math. Single-member districts and plurality voting punish fragmentation because a third candidate can win attention without winning office. Maurice Duverger later described the pattern clearly. Electoral rules that award one seat to the top finisher create pressure toward two dominant vehicles. Ballot access statutes, debate thresholds, fusion bans in many states, and campaign finance habits then reinforce that pressure. The two-party system survives through constitutional design, state statute, and administrative routine more than through sentiment alone. Party infrastructure begins with candidate recruitment. Local party chairs, state committees, donor networks, activists, elected officials, and interest groups search for candidates who can win primaries and survive general elections. That search is practical. Can the candidate raise money? Does the candidate fit the district? Can the candidate avoid scandal? Can the candidate satisfy activists without alienating persuadable voters? Does the candidate have a biography that voters can understand quickly? The party cultivates candidates before many voters know a race has begun. Ballot access adds another layer. Parties and candidates must comply with state rules to appear before voters. Signature thresholds, filing fees, deadlines, primary rules, caucus systems, and election calendars all shape access. Major parties possess lawyers, staff, databases, and local networks to handle those requirements. Minor parties and independent candidates face heavier practical burdens because each state can impose its own path. The ballot is a public document reached through administrative gates, and parties know how to operate those gates. State parties and national committees keep that gatekeeping durable. They maintain county chairs, precinct captains, voter files, delegate rules, convention procedures, legal teams, and relationships with election officials. They know when filing windows open, which signatures count, how challenges work, and how to replace a candidate when a vacancy appears. That knowledge is not glamorous, but it is power. A movement with enthusiasm and no ballot operation can fill a rally and still fail to appear before voters in enough states to carry force. Fundraising turns infrastructure into force. Parties maintain donor lists, small dollar platforms, political action channels, joint fundraising agreements, and relationships with outside groups. Money buys staff, polling, legal review, advertising, travel, mail, text messages, field offices, opposition research, and turnout operations. A candidate with no party support may still speak loudly, but the candidate must build from scratch what parties already possess. Voter data now functions as a form of party capital. Parties track registration, turnout history, consumer data, issue interest, geographic patterns, and past contact records. Campaigns use that data to decide who receives a door knock, text, mailer, ad, or reminder. This does not mean parties control voters like machines. It means parties allocate attention strategically. They do not speak equally to everyone. They target voters who might vote, donate, volunteer, or persuade others. After elections, parties become governing infrastructure. In Congress, party control shapes leadership elections, committee assignments, agenda priorities, messaging, whipping operations, and negotiation strategy. A candidate who runs against party discipline may discover that governing requires party structure anyway. The House Speaker, Majority Leader, Minority Leader, committee chairs, and campaign committees all rely on party organization. The Senate works differently, but party coordination still shapes cloture, nominations, committee work, and bargaining. Coalition maintenance creates constant strain. A major party may contain business interests, labor-aligned voters, religious conservatives, secular progressives, rural voters, urban voters, racial groups, ideological activists, national security hawks, libertarian-leaning voters, and local office holders who care more about roads than national drama. No platform can satisfy every faction equally. Party leaders therefore manage conflict through ambiguity, selective emphasis, procedural control, symbolic gestures, and promises about future action. The big tent is not a campfire scene, it is administrative compromise under pressure. Primary rules intensify that pressure because parties must decide who counts as the party public. Closed primaries limit participation to registered party members. Open primaries allow broader participation. Caucuses reward time, organization, and activist intensity. Each rule changes which faction has leverage. A party that says it follows the people still has to decide which people may choose its nominees and under what procedure. That decision can shape the general election before the general electorate receives a ballot. The limit appears when party loyalty replaces judgment. Voters may defend conduct from their side that they would condemn from the other. Officials may protect party advantage over institutional duty. Party media can turn compromise into betrayal. Primary pressure can punish independence. At that point, the same infrastructure that organizes choice narrows civic imagination. Federalist Number 10 reads like a control memo written before the machine fully existed. Madison put the dangerous word in ink: faction. He defined it as citizens driven by a common passion or interest adverse to the rights of others or to the public good. He admitted the cure could not be suppression because destroying liberty to destroy faction would be worse than the disease. The operating question in the room was therefore control. That word carries force because the Constitution supplied no article for parties while creating incentives that favored them anyway. Separation of powers, staggered elections, congressional voting blocks, and state-centered electoral administration all rewarded durable coordination. Once national leaders needed to move tariffs, banks, treaties, appropriations, and judicial appointments through multiple institutions, informal factions hardened into named parties. The constitutional design did not say build parties here. It made parties the most efficient answer to repeated collective action problems. Madison hoped an extended republic would multiply interests and make dangerous combinations harder to sustain. Party managers later used that same scale as an advantage. National committees, state chairs, convention rules, donor networks, and congressional campaign arms let leaders gather farmers, bankers, evangelicals, union members, suburban professionals, and ideological activists under one label long enough to win offices. The text feared organized interest. The operating system learned how to warehouse it. The source tension, therefore, sits between control and coalition. A party can moderate conflict by forcing bargains before Election Day, but it can also turn temporary grievance into permanent identity by attaching money, data, and procedural access to the label. Federalist Number 10 survives because it captures the pressure point precisely. Self-government needs organization, and organization can harden into a gatekeeping structure that becomes harder to escape with each election cycle. Political parties are the infrastructure of faction because they organize participation before citizens experience politics as choice. They recruit candidates, shape nominations, bundle interests, move money, manage data, interpret issues, and govern after victory. They make democracy usable in a huge republic. They also narrow the menu. A country of this size cannot run national politics through isolated individual judgment alone. Without parties, voters would face chaos, wealthy candidates would gain advantage, and governing coalitions would form invisibly after elections rather than visibly before them. Parties make conflict legible. The danger is that legibility can harden into monopoly. When two parties control the main roads to office, citizens may mistake the available options for the full range of legitimate politics. Third parties, independents, local movements, and dissenting factions may influence debate without gaining power. That can stabilize government, but it can also trap voters inside choices they did not design. This is also why complaints about parties should be aimed at machinery, not only attitude. If citizens want more choices, they must ask about district design, ballot access debate rules, campaign finance, primary law, and voting systems. A two-party system is not maintained by stubbornness alone. Rules reward consolidation and punish fragmentation. The unresolved judgment remains sharp. Do parties discipline faction enough to make self-government possible, or do they become gatekeepers that teach citizens to outsource judgment to coalition labels? The machine may be necessary. Necessity does not make it innocent. The unresolved question is whether parties make democratic choice possible or decide too much before voters arrive.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.